Toni Collette plays Annie Graham. Wait, that sounds an awful like anagram. Well, let's just say her name is just as offbeat as her life. She's an artist, a wife, a grieving daughter who lost both her parents, but most importantly, she's a mom just trying to figure it all out. Watch as Annie learns the most important lesson in life. If your daughter has a fatal peanut allergy and you're gonna send her to a high school party with your son, maybe make sure she has an EpiPen before he leaves. This is Hereditary.
Jesus Christ. You read that like a 90s, like a bad 90s rom-com or something. Like Meet Jack, you know.
She's juggling her life and also Who Goes to Hell?
Have you seen that fake trailer for Shining?
No.
Oh, you haven't seen that? Okay.
I've seen what I was kind of referencing is that fake Black Widow trailer that SNL released back in the day.
Yeah. There's a fake trailer for The Shining you can find on YouTube if you can look it up. Listeners and viewers, I highly recommend this. They basically recut Shining into looking like a rom-com basically. Yeah. And the narration says something somewhere where it's like, meet Jack, he's a writer who can't find work, and it cuts to him like sarcastically typing on the
Did someone like independently just put this together?
I think so. I can't remember
or
what
was
it
like
was
a
for.
Funny or Die sketch or something?
It wasn't
like
a Funny or Die sketch. It was just on YouTube, so I don't know much context around it.
I do remember like coming across this, but yeah, that is genius. Like Jack's just a guy with writer's block.
Yeah, then it ends up leading to like playing wholesome music, saying like sometimes what you're looking for is really just around the corner, shit like that, you know.
Yeah, no, I think of The Shining as a romantic comedy.
That's the one, yeah.
16 years ago.
Yeah, it's an old school video for sure.
Yeah, wow, Isn't it crazy that like when I don't know if you have this experience, but like coming across like an old school YouTube video and seeing the number 16 years ago.
Oh, I know. Especially when like some of the videos were like I was there when they dropped. You know?
Yeah, you were kind of like on the ground floor a little bit on YouTube.
I started watching YouTube probably like late 2006, early 2007.
Yeah.
Territory.
You were kind of like, you had that relationship with YouTube the way Tarantino has with Bong Joon-ho, where he's like, I was there when he was putting out Memories of Murder.
Such a stretch.
Y'all came when Parasite came out, but I was there when The Host came out.
I hate that comparison on all levels, but...
And guys, if you want to hang back with us after this episode's done, on Patreon, we do an extra 20 minutes after show where you get to just hang out with us. We talk about what we've been watching, what we've been doing, what Chris's socks look like, etc.
Sometimes it goes weird places, yeah. So
yeah.
We'd love to have you around. Alas, here we are to talk about Hereditary.
One of your favorite movies.
Yes. Easily one of my favorite horror movies and probably one of my favorite movies out there. I think it's one of the few that to really, really scare me. I first heard about this movie because of Bo Burnham, funny enough.
Yeah.
Because he shared it on his Instagram story, and he said, like, I highly recommend everyone to see this. This movie's really scary, and not like, ooh, fun, popcorn scary, but I want my mommy scary.
I remember seeing that as well, and Bo Burnham, speaking of someone that you were on the ground floor of on YouTube, you watched Bo Burnham, like, growing up, like when he was in his attic.
Yeah, 2008 Bo Burnham.
The attic videos,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
If people who know. And the reason I'm bringing that up is that, like, for both of us, I feel like if Bo Burnham recommends something, we're like, oh, we're there.
Yeah, we value his taste.
He's like a big tastemaker.
Yeah, that's fair. So, yeah, I remember...
You didn't see it in theaters, though, which is important.
Yes, to clarify, I was about to say, you showed it to me yourself. Kind of, we watched it together. You were with me when I first watched it.
I saw it in theaters when it came out because Bo Burnham, funny enough. I saw the trailer for this, and then I heard some people recommend it, and the final nail in the coffin was Bo Burnham, funny enough.
Okay.
So I went and saw it in theaters. We'll talk more about it, but like one of the great horror theater experiences that I'll like carry with me.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And I think you had missed it, but in 2020, we sat down and we were like, okay, you've been wanting to watch it, to be fair, and like we sat down, watched it, and this rarely happens with Chris. I think I've mentioned it in the past where like you're the type of person that doesn't have like a take immediately on a movie, but very quickly after the movie was over that night you were like, I think that's one of my favorite movies. Like,
yeah, I turned right to you and just said that because like you said, we'll get into it more in depth later, but the main thing that made this movie so horrifying was how merciless it is. and how so many movies will do this thing where something terrible happens and then it cuts away to the aftermath of it. Like if a character abruptly dies in a movie, it'll cut to their funeral really hard, right?
Yeah.
This movie is like, oh, let's stay here. You know what I mean? That like the aftermath. That's the worst part.
Oh yeah, there's multiple scenes. I think the one that stands out is the car scene, obviously, where I think that was a big moment where when you and I were watching it together, the car scene happened, and obviously me having seen this before, I was excited to get to that moment because it's such like it's a sick horror moment where it's like, oh god, this is horrible.
Yeah, sick, bad kind of sick.
yeah. That's an important qualifier. Yeah. But I remember when we got to that moment, and the moment where he's like in the car freaking out, kind of like, you're okay, and then it cuts to him parking outside of his house. I remember you saying out loud, just being like, we're gonna follow him? We're still here?
Exactly. I wrote that down in my notes too. I remember that moment too. I was like, we're not cutting away. Like, please don't let me watch this.
And as far as like a theatrical experience, I just remember like the audience I saw it with were so in it. Like they were like all the big moments of the movie, like we were all together. Like in the moments that took our breath away, you could feel the air getting sucked out of the room. Yeah. And I kind of felt like, oh, this is probably what when people went to go see The Shining in theaters, this is probably what they felt like.
Or The Exorcist.
Or The Exorcist. The Exorcist is a great example. I'm like, oh, this is probably what it felt like for people who went to go see Halloween in theaters, or like these iconic horror movies that we like commend and we look up to now.
Yeah, that actually like frightened you too. Like I remember I had a similar thing when I saw Paranormal Activity in theaters.
Oh, sure.
Funny enough, that movie's not nearly as scary as Hereditary.
But Paranormal Activity was one of those theaters where in the marketing they were showing audience reactions.
Exactly, that was a big part of the thing. But I remember when I watched it, there were a lot of like the collective audience screams that happened.
Yeah, dude. You know, we always talk about it, but like, there's always this whole thing of like, cinema's dead, cinema's dying. No one's seeing like non-IP movies. But throughout time, we've just noticed that horror is like the last stand. Everyone still goes out to see. Like, Talk to Me can still make like almost $90 million in theaters.
Yeah.
And horror, like the new what's that James Wan Patrick Wilson franchise called? Insidious.
Yeah, the Conjuring, not the Conjuring, but the Insidious universe or whatever, right?
Insidious, The Red Door, a movie that got very mediocre reviews. And everyone who saw it was like, yeah, it's all right. Made almost $100 million. The same summer that Barbie and Oppenheimer and Mission Impossible are coming out.
It like competes with them.
It just shows that horror is always going to be there.
Well, and horror is. I said this when we did a Q&A a while back when you got 20K subscribers on our reaction channel.
Yeah.
I remember we talked about how horror is one of the few places where you can get really original stories too, because so much of it is IP. But horror, like you said, Talk to Me, like original movies can be made and make a fuck ton of money and everyone goes sees together.
Well, yeah, I think that's the thing, right? Like, I think we're living in an age now where it's harder to get original dramas and romantic dramas. I mean, they still come out, but it's like very few and far between.
Sci-fi is like
originals. I mean, that's why The Creator was such a big deal, right? The John David Washington movie that just came out, because it was like original sci-fi. This is crazy. Nowadays, in the era we're living in for movies, if a movie's not like an IP movie, and I'm not just talking about superheroes, anything that's based off a brand that we're familiar with, then the next thing is horror.
Yeah,
that's the thing where people are going to go out to go see it, because it's still one of those things where you're like, fuck, I just want to experience this with people.
Yeah, it's one of the good, the cinema experiences that don't really die because it's always fun. Even when it's bad, it's still fun to go see a horror movie in theaters.
If a horror movie's bad, then it's going to be funny.
Yeah.
Then people are kind of laughing at how like, oh, that was a lame jump scare. My favorite parts, as much as like, yeah, sure, I'm not a huge fan of jump scares, but if you see jump scares with an audience, it's fun because it's like everyone's laughing afterwards.
Yeah, especially those fake out jump scares. It's like, hey, Mom, what's for dinner? Those types of jumps.
Oh, totally. Like, we're all just giggling. I mean, that's the cool thing about horror is that like even when, not just when it's bad, when it's good, it can still be funny.
Yeah.
And Hereditary and Midsommar as well, which we're going to be uploading a reaction for Midsommar soon, that you watched it for the first time.
Yeah, I'm not sure the chronology of when this video will be posted or when Midsommar's reaction will be posted, but if it hasn't come out yet, spoiler alert, we're doing Midsommar. If it's already out, go check it out.
But both Midsommar, this are like pitched as horror movies, but they both have like a very comedic sense, like this fucked up sense of humor that Ari Aster has like infused in them.
Yeah.
Which is always so interesting to me. Like, doing a rewatch of this, like, a lot of scenes with Toni Collette and the rest of the family, I was kind of laughing. Like,
yeah, there's a lot of uncomfortable interactions that the characters have with each other, and I think it's very real, which is what makes it compelling. I remember I saw a clip of Martin Scorsese praising Hereditary. Have you seen that clip?
Yeah.
And it's true what he said about it, where he was saying, like, the horror, it's definitely a horror movie, but the real compelling part of it is the family dynamic. At the core of this movie, it's a family drama.
I have the quote right here of Ari Aster doing a Vanity Fair interview where he said, "I wanted to make a film that served as a serious meditation on grief and trauma. It begins as a family tragedy and then continues down that path, but gradually curdles into a full-bore nightmare. In the same way that life can really feel like a nightmare, like everything is falling apart."
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the emotional core of this movie taps into that for sure. You know,
he's really good at like exaggerating and heightening really like raw human emotion. So like even Midsummer, right? He talks about that as a breakup movie and is like, he was like, I wanted to take what a breakup feels like, which is the most apocalyptic feeling in your mind, and put that onto film.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he does that. He makes it like the biggest deal in the world because it is to you. And he said Midsummer's a horror movie for the guys, but a fairy tale for the main character.
That's a good way to put it for sure. I mean, that's what good horror does too.
Yeah.
Is like, I mean, I think what's cool what Hereditary does is it has an emotional core, but it also is unapologetically a horror movie in that it presents it as very hopeless too.
Yeah, which is like Hereditary is the straight horror movie out of his like 3-movie like filmography that he has. Like even Midsummer, you can kind of make the argument that it's kind of genre bending in a way.
It's a light blend. Yeah, it's not nearly as intense as Hereditary.
And Beau is Afraid is like a bunch of genres, right?
Yeah.
But Hereditary, he even says, yeah, no, this is a horror.
It's
movie.
a pure horror movie. Yeah.
And it kind of brought on this like, it didn't start it, but it definitely heightened this whole like feeling of prestige and elevated horror, which a lot of people don't even like using that phrase anymore, elevated horror, which is basically like
art house horror,
right? Horror that doesn't have jump scares, horror that is dealing with deeper themes and is way more serious and takes itself seriously. But I think Ari Aster even himself doesn't like that, just because he feels like it's drawing lines in a genre that's not necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong. To me, horror is so broad, right? Like, what scares you is so subjective. Like, some people probably think Hereditary is boring and it didn't remotely scare them, right? Because you know, then something else might completely scare them that doesn't scare us.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just about as broad as something like rock and roll. Like when you say like, oh, I love rock music, what does that mean, right? Is that metal? Is that grunge? Is that alternative? Is that classic Elvis Presley rock?
That's what I think Ari Aster's been kind of fighting that.
Yeah.
Like that, exactly what you're saying of just like, let's not draw lines, because
It's like gatekeeping.
I think Beau is Afraid is a huge statement of just like, no, you're not going to call me the master of horror. I can do whatever I want, right? Because after Hereditary, that's kind of what happened. It's like, we got the new king.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of like what happened when Jordan Peele came out with Get Out. It's like, our new John Carpenter.
Or a new Alfred Hitchcock or whatever it is. Yeah.
Everyone wants to like put that label. And what I like about Ari Aster's filmography is that even Hereditary, it's a straight horror movie, but there's like so many weird things in it that don't fall under the traditional horror, and I kind of like that about it.
Yeah, it makes the art more three-dimensional in a way.
Exactly.
You know, because I think, you know, no one wants every human being, right? Like if you take even someone like Alfred Hitchcock, who's so known for his suspense, I'm sure he likes goofy comedies. I'm sure he liked other
Alfred
things.
Hitchcock has like a lot of screwball comedy elements in his movies.
Exactly, but you know, but I think it's cool when artists can express themselves in other ways and show other sides of them. You know, we even talked about that in the last podcast with Whiplash. We talked about how Damien Chazelle shows a different side of him when he made La La Land after making something like Whiplash.
100%. I mean, I think horror fans especially are looking for the next John Carpenter. But even John Carpenter was like, I'm going to go make Big Trouble in Little China. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he'll make something goofy.
Like, we want to remember him for The Thing in Halloween, but he's made all different kinds of movies.
Sure, yeah.
Which is what's cool about it. We can go on for that for days, but I think, like, what I wanted to get at is that this movie was part of this trend that's still kind of going on, where horror has to deal with trauma and grief in some way. The main character has to have gone through this like big traumatic past, and that's what's informing the story engine.
Yeah.
The best example of this next to Hereditary, in my opinion, is Babadook.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one, yeah.
which came out in 2014 to be fair. But I think Babadook and Hereditary are like distant cousins in a way.
Okay.
Which
yeah.
I know that comparison's been made in the past, but like I don't want to spoil Babadook for anyone who hasn't seen it either.
Yeah, I think like Babadook, without spoiling it, leans very heavily into pure grief. That's really what it is. And Hereditary definitely 110% deals with grief, but it deals with a couple other things as well regarding like family and like generational trauma too.
I wrote here that for me, the big metaphor of this movie is how family can pass trauma down, and you don't have a choice with that. You're gonna have to face that.
Yeah, I mean, Hereditary is very much in a weird way, as broad as it sounds. It's about life and death. And it's about like, it's like it sounds really weird to say, but it kind of is. It's
because you could make the argument that almost all movies are.
Yeah, but it's very much about kind of, I guess, the lack of control that comes with life and death, that you don't ask for the traits that you're given or the upbringing for you to have or the things that guide you to be who you are and the things you carry and pass down to your kids in the future. You don't really control that,
100%. I think the lack of control really stood out in this movie, that like throughout the runtime of this movie, Annie's trying to process all these things, and she's trying to reject what her mother passed down to her. The whole paint thinner story, like carrying this guilt, and then also by the last 30 minutes of this movie, her figuring out and trying to save her son, and the whole idea of her throwing the book, but her husband still lighting up on fire. Like, you're gonna have to deal with this. You can't escape.
Yeah.
And it's kind of bold to be like, there is no escape. You're gonna deal with the trauma.
That's what, like I said, it's very hopeless.
Something that I'd like to cite are people that you and I both look up to, that we put on a pedestal, is Red Letter Media.
Yes.
Listen to this podcast, but if you haven't, go watch their Half in the Bag episode on Hereditary. I think it's like some of the best of what they've done in terms of film analysis. And I remember Mike talked about how like he loves the fact that by the end of this movie, there's no like football jock team that comes to save them.
No, not at all. Like
it literally ends on this wide shot of them in a black void of just them saying "Hail!"
Yeah, it literally ends like just the bad guys get exactly what they want.
I remember two girls sitting right across from me in the theater when that ending happens and it cuts to credits. She was like, "What the fuck was that?"
Yeah. I know. And
it's hard to process, It
really is. I think and it's cool because on a rewatch, do you know the YouTuber Ryan Hollinger?
Yeah.
Okay, have you seen his video on Hereditary?
I haven't. I know of him. I think I've seen his thumbnail too.
Yeah, I highly recommend him and listeners and viewers too, because he's really great at dissecting horror from like an emotional standpoint of like what makes it effective, not just like the filmmaking, which he does talk about, but very much like kind of the stuff that we talk about. Like I said, how Hereditary is about life and death. And one point that he made was kind of how when it cuts to the funeral of the mom, how it just starts with that frame or that portrait of her just staring right at the camera pretty much.
Yeah.
And it basically is like informing the viewer that she's dead, but she doesn't really feel dead.
It's such a strong image too of
it's
her.
So uncomfortable.
That's what I wanted. I think there's this like, I don't want to be this guy that's like Ari Aster's our next Kubrick, but there is this Kubrickian quality to Ari Aster where he can create an image where you're like, this is off.
It's like a little uncanny.
Exactly. Uncanny is the perfect word to put it, because there's a lot of frames in this movie where I'm like, that just looks strange. And he does that a lot in Midsommar, in my opinion, and especially Beau is Afraid. I mean, Beau is Afraid is kind of all that.
I know. There's a lot of images in Hereditary that do not leave you. It's like we can't even get started on that.
I also just like how this movie can be frustrating the first time you watch it, because you're trying to figure it out.
Well, that's what's cool. Yeah, it constantly plants little seeds and asks questions, and a new development happens, but you feel just as clueless as the main character.
It doesn't show its cards up until like the last 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Which is very impressive that never was I bored when I was watching Hereditary. Like the first time I watched it, all the rewatches, the rewatches obviously, but the first time I watched it, I was so confused, but I was never bored.
Yeah, well, and I think, like I said, what makes it effective is the fact that Annie is just as confused as we are.
Yeah.
And
the family is in general.
The whole family, yeah. I mean, I guess really the mostly confused one is probably poor Peter, if you really had to hone in on probably arguably the biggest victim in all of this.
One of my favorite horror performances. I think you and I will probably talk about Toni Collette a lot.
Yeah, I hope we do.
I think Alex Wolff is so underrated of how good he is in this movie.
Oh, he's amazing.
Because to keep that like level of emotion up for an entire movie where you just constantly feel like you're a sack of shit. You know what I mean? Like from like, well, he's a stoner in the beginning. He's kind of indifferent, but to like, especially the last hour where he just feels like there's this weight on him that won't go away. Yeah, is amazing. Anyways.
Yeah, I agree though. To expand off that, like he also has a very emotionally demanding role. Everyone always talks about Toni Collette, like you said, which is also an incredibly emotionally demanding role. But also, Peter's character has to carry the guilt of being responsible for his sister's death.
Yes.
And they convey that so well, even visually. You know, like even just the simple shot, obviously the iconic shot of Toni Collette like dry heaving on the ground, you know, crying over
I just want to die after Charlie dies.
Exactly. And how it slowly pulls out and then the camera pans over, then you just see Peter standing there.
Yes.
It's a good visual way to show his guilt without him just saying, I'm guilty.
Guilt is just like the biggest part of this movie, I feel like. Peter feeling guilty for obvious reasons, but also once we learn about the paint thinner story, which I have that as its own section. I kind of love that the story of Annie, like, sleepwalking one night, waking up from her sleepwalk and seeing paint thinner covering both Charlie and Peter with matches lit is horrifying. But I love that story doesn't come until Charlie dies, and it's almost an hour into the movie. So for a big part of the movie, you're kind of just feeling that there's this like distance between the family because of the mother's death. But once you realize no one really liked Grandma, so why is there still this level of like distance? No, it's because everyone's still on edge about her, about Annie.
Exactly. Which is what adds to the title of the movie, Hereditary. I
just love the idea that we don't know that until an hour in, and then it kind of unlocks the movie for us.
Yeah, and then also, you know, leading up to it, the iconic scene of, you know, that nightmare sequence of her telling Peter, like, I didn't want to be your mother. Like, you also, that unlocks a new thing, too, where you realize that she didn't want to have Peter.
I gotta say, another great, and I'm going to repeat this throughout the entire movie. I have a podcast, I don't care. But, like, when I was in the theater and she says the line, I never wanted to be your mother. Like, you could hear the theater be like, oh. Like, like, oddly, that was the biggest reaction.
Oh, I mean, it's such a jarring moment. And again, this is one thing that makes the horror so effective, too, is that, like, yes, there are ghosts and creepy images and whatever, possession and stuff. Though some of the horror is in just the interactions between these characters.
It's a great what if horror movie. Like, what would happen? Like, how would you react if that happened to you?
Like the worst things that you could experience in a family.
Like, how would you react if your mother said those things to you, or if you woke up and your mother had like a matchbox and you had paint thinner over yourself? Like, you would never trust your mother again.
Yeah.
There's no way, how much you love her, you would always be on edge.
Well, and you gradually see her start to lose her mind over the course, that she's trying to do a seance with her family and trying to make them do it.
But I also do love that Peter's trying. Like, towards the beginning of the movie, Peter's still just being like, oh, well, I'm still gonna eat here, but afterwards I want to go to the party. Like, it's not like Peter's completely like, fuck you, mom. Like, it's so realistic how the family's trying to keep their shit. Especially the dad. The dad's trying to be like normal, but they just can't. It's not gonna work. They're just doomed from the beginning.
I know that's very much. That's where it benefits from a rewatch too.
Yes,
is like you realize how many things are planted, which they set that up in the beginning during the classroom scene when they're talking about the story of, I think it was like Hercules or something, when they were saying like all the foreshadows were there but they didn't see it. That's one thing about movies in general. Anytime it cuts to a high school classroom,
listen to the dialogue.
Exactly, or a college lecture, you know they're giving subtext about the movie.
I also love the way Ari Aster does that too, because he's very aware of that trope. He's aware of the fact that like when you cut to a teacher talking about history or like just like religion, it's gonna be related to the movie. So the way he delivers that exposition of the girl being like, because it's literally like telling the literal story of the like, it's kind of funny.
Yeah, it's this exactly, and it benefits from a rewatch again, you know, because you know what happens later, so you're like, oh.
I just appreciate the fact that Ari Aster has like a cheeky sense of humor about it.
Exactly, yeah.
I even love the fact that like during the funeral sequence when Annie is going up to give a speech, how she's trying to say jokes that just don't land.
Yeah, I know.
Doesn't she say the thing is just like, my mom was a very private person, she had a very private life, it almost feels like a betrayal standing up here and talking about her. I love how there's no pity chuckles either. It cuts back to the people just being like...
Yeah, just showing what an uncomfortable funeral's like.
And there's just... It's not just the fact that it's someone died in the family. There's immediately this off-putting nature about it. I think that the key is like seeing that photo of the mother just sitting there, like looking.
Yeah, there's like this. Well, there's like weight to it, and I think that's kind of close to life. A lot of that happens where, like, you know, death comes mercilessly in real life. Like, it'll happen abruptly, people, or at least not all the time, but think that does happen though for a lot of people, where like you lose someone and you have unresolved problems, you have questions that are left unanswered, or things you wish you could have, time you could have wished you spent.
And I think like things that I love about this movie specifically on this watch, because I recently lost a family member, right? I had to go back home without going too much in details, just to keep my private life private. I lost a family member, and it was like the first time it was like close family member. And I remember just going back home and feeling weird about it all for obvious reasons, right? But watching this movie now, there was a lot of like resonance of just like simple things of when Annie comes back home and she's like, should I feel sadder? Like,
Yeah.
I remember thinking that to myself. I'm like, why am I the only one that's not crying? You know what I mean? Why am I the only one that's not upset? And I kind of connected a lot with like Charlie in that sense, the dad.
Because Charlie's not the dad. What's the dad?
Steven.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah.
Charlie's the daughter. It's Steve. Okay, I'm gonna have to correct that in the edit. I think I've just been saying Charlie, but I connected a lot with Steve. Just because Steve's the guy just be like, hey son, you gotta do that SAT prep. And it's just like, Dad, I just fucking accidentally killed my sister. Shut up.
Yeah.
Like, but he's trying to keep things normal. Yeah. And I remember feeling that way. I'm like, okay, if I'm the only one that's emotionally okay, then I gotta be the peacekeeper. And I think that's something that this movie tackled, is like everyone during grief, especially a family, ends up having a role.
Yeah, exactly. Totally.
Especially Annie. Annie gets to be the one that gets to freak out. And the dad's like, okay, let mom do her thing. Like, she's like, she needs to leave.
Well, yeah, and he's the one that has to be strong, kind of thing.
And it tackles that in brilliant ways, too, right? Like, little things of how Annie gets annoyed by Steve. How, like, Steve tries to be like, oh, so you're working on the art piece. Yeah. When's the deadline? And she says the deadline. He's like, ooh, coming up. And I just love the shot of her putting her glasses down and just looking at him, and then it cuts away. You can just tell she's so annoyed by him. It's like, the fuck, you're talking to me about deadlines?
Yeah, Steve is also one of the bigger victims of this whole ordeal, too. You know what I mean?
It was funny. I was so, like, the first few times I watched, I've seen this movie 4 times now.
Okay.
Once in theaters, once with you, then twice for this podcast. And I remember the first 2 times watching it, I was team Steve all the way. I was like, well, he's the only sane one. He has to keep shit together. And now watching it after going through the family experience, I'm like, dude, shut the fuck up. Like,
read the room, Steve.
Even though literally his wife is going insane.
It's very 3-dimensional. All the characters make sense. Literally every single one of the way they deal with it. The fact that Peter's kind of dissociated with it, the way he's too young to remotely process. Like, literally people like our age probably can't process something like that alone, let alone a teenager who's trying to worry about things like SATs and just being a normal adult.
Yeah, still trying to, like, he likes a girl in school.
Exactly. And so there's no way he can remotely confront that thing, and no one's really holding his hand and showing him enough love to help him understand it,
Yeah, and the dynamics with how this family's dealing with grief together are just so real to me, especially with what I've gone through now. You know what I mean? It was such an interesting watch, and it's funny, when I sat down to do this podcast, I didn't even think about that. But when I started watching the movie, I'm like, oh, damn, yeah.
This movie gets me.
Now, to be frank with you, my mom didn't go insane and start trying to kill me, but like...
Yeah, that's always nice. That's always preferable.
Like, at the end of the day, I hugged my family, we were okay, it's fine.
So far.
Yeah, you don't know. Oh shit, my mom's in the corner.
Yeah, exactly. Just up there, up in the corner.
Which, again, you can imagine how awesome that was in theaters. Like, it was just... I kind of just wish you were there with me. Like, it would, like, I can only imagine how cool it would have been for you and I to go see this in theaters together, and afterwards being like, dude, we gotta, like, take a walk. Like,
yeah, well, the only theater experience I've had that really frightened me was The Lighthouse.
Yeah, you and I saw that together.
Yeah, which maybe we'll do a pod on that sometime too. I would love to. Yeah,
of course we will.
That movie's fire, but
yeah.
But Hereditary without a doubt would have scared the shit out of me if I saw it in theaters.
When this movie starts, the big mystery is like, what's going on with Charlie? Mm-hmm. Like, obviously, she has some sort of disability, and you know that.
I know about disability, but she just seems like different. Like something about her's off.
Yeah, and you don't know if that's just like that's just how she was born or whatever, or if there's something going on here.
Yeah.
You're also watching a horror movie, so there's something going on here.
Well, the trailers and the poster and everything imply like creepy possessed child kind of thing.
They used her a lot in the promotional material, which is one thing I will say it works brilliantly if you're watching this for the first time, because you think this is going to be another Insidious.
Yeah, or an Exorcist or something like that.
You think this kid is possessed, and that's going to be the whole movie. Evil kid. And I love that fucking twist that it's not.
Yeah. No, and it's such a jarring way to tell you it's not, too.
Oh, yeah. It's kind of like a slap in the face from the filmmaker just being like, we're not doing that. This is a different type of story, but it does promote itself like it's going to be that.
Yeah.
Especially, forget the trailer. The first 15 minutes are kind of like, okay, the kid's going to the treehouse. There's something going on. She sees dead grandma.
Yeah, exactly. You're talking about in the distance in the fire in the woods.
So you just think, I was like, oh, so the grandma's possessing her, and then that's what.
Yeah, and she cuts the head off the little, the pigeon. Too.
Yeah, the pigeon slams into the window, dies. She's the only one that doesn't react. You're like, oh, evil child.
Yeah. But... yeah, no, it's a genius way to have the audience be just as shocked as the characters, too. Like, as soon as it happens... we can just go over the scene if you want. Just straight up that
oh, yeah.
decapitation scene.
Yeah, they're at the party. She eats the chocolate cake that has nuts in it. Mm-hmm. It's walnuts, right?
Yeah.
I remember them, like...
cashews or
the
walnuts.
Party opens with them chopping walnuts.
And it does, like, a close-up of just this visceral chopping.
Yeah, and she eats the cake, throat gets big, allergic reaction, Peter freaks out in the car, and then, is there a deer in the middle of the...
Yeah, so he's driving her, and she leans her head out the window to get some air, and while he's driving, he suddenly sees, dead deer in the road.
Yes.
And he swerves, and while the car is swerving, her head gets knocked off through a pole.
That pole is also set up while they're going to the party, and we just see a quick shot of the pole with the symbol on it.
Yeah, the insignia, the Paimon insignia.
The Paimon insignia. No, we forget about it very quickly.
Yeah.
It's kind of brilliant that it shows us, and we don't... I don't know about you, but the first time seeing it, I remember seeing that pole. We cut to the party, but because the allergy scene is so visceral and you're only thinking about that, you completely forget about the pole.
Yeah, and then you remember the pole once it happens.
It's just a brilliant foreshadowing that you also forget about.
Yeah.
And so when it happens, that's like, I feel like that's also a scene that kind of just lets you know what kind of horror movie this is going to be. Oh, like you said in the beginning of this podcast, we're going to sit in these moments.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is, like, as soon as it happens, the intense music just stops, right? It's like dead silence, the car slams. It's this unnerving wide of just the car sitting there and then him, just frightened.
The gas from the exhaust, lighting up the road.
Exactly.
It's a beautiful shot, but also just like you feel like you can't breathe.
Yeah, that silence feels like hours. Like the anxiety that you feel watching this, and I'm when I say you, I'm sure listeners would agree with this, who enjoy this movie. Like, the anxiety is worse than any creepy ghost or spooky clown or anything like that.
Yeah, because it's so long.
Yeah.
It's also like...
And it's real. It feels like something that could really happen. It's like the worst thing that you could imagine happening.
My favorite moment in that, it's weird to say favorite, but I think the moment that just hits the hardest is he looks at the rearview mirror and then the camera's at his perspective and then the camera quickly goes down again.
Yeah, because you can't look at what he just did.
And then it's like, he's like, you're okay. He can barely say it, but he's like, you're okay. He's trying to talk himself through it, and that's like the realest thing ever. I'm like, oh, you captured what that would be like.
Well, and not to mention, he is also really high. That dude was taking bong rips right before that.
That's a detail I forgot about until this rewatch.
Oh, really? Okay.
I hadn't seen this movie. I mean,
Yeah.
to be clear, we watched this in 2020.
Sure.
When I showed it to you, and then I hadn't seen it again in a while. And it's not like I go on YouTube and pop up scenes from this. I mean, I pop up scenes, but not this scene. This scene is hard to watch.
It's funny because I rewatched it this morning to prepare for this. It wasn't, this was my third time watching it, so it wasn't like the only rewatch I did. But when I rewatched it, I had it on my computer for the most recent time this morning. And when that scene was coming up, I sort of just started opening other tabs and telling myself, you've seen this, you don't need to rewatch it. Even though it's like, no, it's really because I'm avoiding it.
100%. I said this to you off camera, like last week. I was like, hey, you know how there's movies where, like The Matrix or Back to the Future, for example, where when you're watching it, all you're thinking about is like, oh, this scene's coming up, I can't wait for this scene. This scene's coming up, I can't wait for this scene. In this movie, I was like, fuck it, we're at the party. Shit. like, you're not looking forward to scenes, which is like a hokey thing to say for most horror movies, but it's so applicable for this one.
100%.
Like, there's great horror movies, but there's not that many that can achieve that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are horror movies where you do want to rewatch it. Like when I
like that's what I'm saying. Like you actually are looking for that experience.
Yeah, like Nightmare on Elm Street. I think of some of the kills in that movie where I'm like, dude, the scene of her floating in the air as she's about to, like, it's so cool, right?
Hereditary. No, Hereditary. I was gonna say, Halloween. Mm-hmm. The John Carpenter horror stuff, especially like The Thing, all that stuff. Like you kind of like it's like popcorn. You do want to check that out. I consider a lot of the James Wan stuff that way too, where it's more blockbuster Hollywood horror, which is not a dig at it. I do love those movies, but this is one where I'm like, oh, this is real. I don't want to.
This is like pure horror.
This movie tells you, okay, evil kid that you thought was going to be the evil kid's dead.
Well, and that's what the whole kind of plot kicks in.
It's so crazy that this movie starts with death. And you're just like, oh, yeah, no, we're going to show you another family death right away.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I think the thing that we haven't discussed is the fact that he gets out of the car, goes to his room, and goes to sleep. Mm-hmm. Well, he probably didn't sleep that night, but, like, it's insane that we even get the shot of him walking inside and you hear the mom being like, oh, good, they're here.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is again, it's so real. That's like a parent thing to do of just, like, parents worrying about their kids. Oh, they're home. Cool.
I've told you this story, right? That I hit a wheel on the road once while I was driving?
Yes, you have. Yeah. But you should say it again for the podcast.
So it reminds me, that moment, going back to, Peter driving back home or to the hospital. Because I was on a road trip, long story. I pulled over to get gas, but it was late at night. And I was driving down this long strip of road. There was nothing on either side. And I was a dumb 19-year-old and didn't have my high beams on. I had my normal, lights on for nighttime, but I didn't have my head, brights on to see further ahead. Mm-hmm. And there was a fucking wheel on the road. Not a tire, not a piece of rubber, a wheel with a rim.
What the hell?
And so I like how you're invested in it, even though you know the story. But I hit it, and because I didn't process it, I saw it upcoming, and I just sort of hit it. And it lifted my front left tire and sparks flew out.
Yeah.
And as soon as it was over, like as soon as I passed under it, luckily I didn't damage anything else. But obviously I had a flat. But I still felt while I was driving like the scrape, like something was dangling down onto the pavement. Like I could feel this like noise while I was driving. And I was like, oh man, I fucked up.
I'm not going to describe it in detail, but I had a really bad accident one time, like a car accident. Mm-hmm. And that moment, of course I didn't do what Peter did, but like that moment of just like sitting in your car right after it happens, I'd be like,
oh, I'm sure many listeners have had either near-death experiences behind the wheel or close calls. It's basically like showing what the worst possible outcome could be, right? Like we're all trying to do that, right? Everyone, when you're waiting on someone to get home, you text them or call them to make sure that they're okay.
And the mom called Peter like twice.
Exactly.
Like we're at the party.
Exactly. We all kind of have that hope of like I said, if someone's on their way home and you don't hear from them for a little bit, there's always that passing wonder of like, oh, are they okay? There's something, you know what I mean? Oh, what if something happened? There's always that brief moment, even if it's brief, and then you get a call and like, oh, hey, just want to make sure, cool. But this movie is like, here's what happens when that thing
that you always worry about.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. The worst possible thing that could happen.
It happened.
Exactly.
Now, I couldn't fucking sit still in my seat in the theater when the next morning happens and you just hear her just being like, all right, I'm getting something from the store. Do you want anything? Okay, cool.
And you're just waiting for her to see it because you just know that that's gonna happen.
I think there's certain thing. This is gonna be a weird thing to say, but the way Toni Collette cries is, it's so hard hitting. Like the pitch of it, I don't usually hear in a lot of movies.
Yeah.
Where it feels like real, like I'm stricken with grief. Like
absolute agony.
Agony. That's the word I was looking for. And he does it again in Midsommar, which again, for people who haven't seen Midsommar, I won't spoil it. But like he does it again in Midsommar, and you know the scene I'm talking about. And I think he's just so good at that, to like have his actors like bring out that noise, because it's a noise you don't hear in movies, and I think it's because of how uncomfortable it is to hear that. To hear that level of agony is like you want it to stop.
Yeah, well, exactly. It doesn't feel Hollywoody because like we've all seen like, you know, the action hero loses his wife and is like, no, you know what I'm saying? Like Star Wars does shit like that all the time.
That gif of Brad Pitt, who's amazing, but that gif of Brad Pitt in Seven just being like,
yeah, which, you know, and this isn't even a dig at those movies. It's just Hollywoody, you know, because it's meant to not really feel that visceral and disturbing to look at. But this movie is very much, again, like I said earlier, unapologetic in showing you the face of what real grief looks like.
It holds up on a rewatch. That being said, what was it like for you just watching this movie again?
I mean, same deal where when the scenes come up, I don't look forward to them. I'm just kind of sitting here tight, just like, okay, all right, just get through this one. Just get through this scene,
yeah.
You know? And then when it's over, I'll look for little hints and treat it like a quirky rewatch.
Yeah, to process it, kind of.
Yeah.
But I think about that, I'm like, I don't think there's other movies that make me feel that way. I mean, maybe Exorcist.
Oh, yeah, I haven't rewatched Exorcist since we watched it for the reaction channel.
And if you watch our reaction to Exorcist, I said in that video, I was like, I don't think I want to watch this again. Yeah. I think this was really great, and I love the filmmaking behind it. I really respect this movie. I did like it. I don't think I want to watch it again. And Hereditary, I don't put on.
Yeah, you don't just put that movie on casually.
Midsommar, I would.
Oh, fair enough.
I could rewatch Midsommar. I mean, some people say that Midsommar, like I have a friend of mine that like is like Midsommar's his favorite horror movie in general. And he feels that way about Midsommar. He's like, I don't think I want to just put that on. Beau is Afraid I could watch again, but it's like Hereditary is the one where I'm like, I'm not touching that.
Yeah, that movie's cursed.
Something that we haven't discussed, aside from just how this movie makes you feel, is that it looks beautiful.
Yes, this movie is stunning.
The cinematographer, I'm going to butcher his name, but he shot both Midsommar and Hereditary. His name is Paweł Porgazelski, and he's apparently an Ari Aster college friend.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
He shot like Ari Aster's short films too, which if you guys are fans, and you are as well, go watch his short films. They're just as fucked up as his movies. And I kind of love it.
You need to get that little Ari Aster kick.
Yeah, there's this one where it's dealing with his family, and it's like so uncomfortable to watch. It's kind of impressive for a student short film to be like, yeah, we're making this shit. Yeah. Because student films are usually more safe but more dramatic, and I love that Ari Aster was like, no, this is where I'm coming from. Apparently, like, people in his class didn't like them, and I'm like, that's so rock and roll.
Yeah, but going off the cinematography, one thing I really do love about it is how much of like dollhouse usage there is.
Yeah, I mean, that's like one of the first things I wrote down.
Yeah, and it's very obvious, you know, and it's very
the
clear
opening shot.
Opening shot literally pulls in on the dollhouse. But even like when it cuts to them getting back from the funeral house, is really wide shot of the living room.
Oh my god!
I
wrote all this down. Yeah, this is great. I love it.
Yeah. There's so much of like, when it sets the stage, it feels like this very far away angle. Even when it shows like, you know, and it establishes that they're at the house, it's very big and wide. You see just trees in the distance. It feels like almost like a God's eye kind of view.
Well, specifically the shot of like, this is when it transitions into the final big set piece, the final act of the movie, if you will, where it cuts to the wide right after Toni Collette becomes possessed. And it cuts to the establishing shot of the house, and then it match cuts to night. And it doesn't feel like a regular match cut. It feels like a light switch came on.
Yeah, it's really abrupt.
So, and in that sense, it does feel like, okay, someone's pulling the strings here.
Yeah, you know.
Which is like, now we know it's like the spirits, Paimon, all that shit. It's like, but there is something else going on here.
Yeah, this is a weird pull, but it reminded me of The Sims a little bit. Do you ever play The Sims?
That's a big hole for me. Like I haven't.
Oh, dude, yeah. I mean, it's probably too late now. That game was really trendy in the early 2000s. But with that point is, a lot of the angles are from the above view, and you can kind of shift the camera around. You see the walls come down so you can see inside the house a little bit.
Okay.
And it's weird that it reminded me, but fun fact, The Sims was originally going to be titled Virtual Dollhouse.
Interesting.
That was kind of the...
Well, I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah, they ended up changing it because they think boys should be able to play it too, and no boy little...
Marketing it towards, like, boys and saying virtual dollhouse might be counterproductive. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of my first notes was a lot of the shots are flat and front-facing, looks like a dollhouse.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk about, like, the use of wide shots in this movie in general, aside from the dollhouse aspect of it, which, by the way, that opening shot is amazing. And I don't know if you felt this, but when I was in theaters watching that opening shot for the first time, where it opens with a treehouse and then it pans and then the dad comes in the dollhouse and it goes in, I remember having a moment where I'm like, oh, fuck, man, this is, like, going to be a good movie. This is gonna, you just know sometimes we're like, oh, we're in good hands.
Yeah, this is a competently crafted film.
Sometimes, like, there's certain, I don't know, I can't cite another movie. Talk to Me gave me that feeling a little bit, where, like, Talk to Me has an opening scene where I'm like, oh, we're in good hands. I don't know, like, do you have a movie like that where it opened and you're like, shit, okay, this is gonna be good?
I'll need to think about that one.
I think it's a
100% guarantee I have an answer, but it just doesn't pop up immediately.
There's been moments like that for me. I can't think of many, but
yeah.
What I was gonna say is that there's a lot of wide shots that I really love in this movie, and they make you lean into the frame more because you're kind of like, I don't know what I'm looking at. Which I always love when movies make you do that, right?
Yeah, they make you do a little work to find stuff.
I felt like Nope did that, right? Like Nope, like remember, like you'd be watching the movie and you'd be looking at the clouds.
Oh yeah, you're looking for little hints. I mean, Hereditary does that well too by adding inserts of little clues, like the necklace, with the insignia, and then showing the weird little Latin phrases that are on the walls.
100%, and also just like. Yeah, and not cutting a close-up to it. It just shows it, and you're like kind of like looking for it.
Yeah, so it just sets that up that you got to do a little bit of brain work to kind of figure out what's going on in this movie.
Some of the shots that I've listed is cult lady waving to Charlie behind the fence of the school. And you don't know who she is. Is that grandma? No, I don't think that's grandma.
Yeah.
Like, what is that?
And it never really answers it either.
But no, it's like one of the cult ladies that was with them.
Yeah.
But you don't realize that.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You could hypothetically forget about that moment and the movie would still work, right?
Exactly. And then, obviously, one of the most famous wide shots in this movie is one that we already referenced, is Annie crouching in the corner of the room, looking down while Peter's waking up and you see her in the darkness.
Yeah.
And to this day, I pause the frame and I kind of try to look for what her facial expression is, but it's lit so beautifully that I know it's Toni Collette, but I can't see her face.
Yeah, and it's really effective because you just know it's not her anymore.
But that's why I'm like, I always pause the movie and I'm like kind of looking to see like, okay, what she's doing.
Yeah.
And you can't tell. You can see her eyes, but you can't tell. I just think that's brilliant lighting. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I remember the first scare and like real scare in the movie was when was it like up? It wasn't in the attic, but it was like.
Are you talking about the first jump scare?
No. It was like the first like actually startling image is when she sees the kind of, I guess, ghost of the grandma.
Yeah, she's in the workshop. She's in
the
workshop.
It was in the workshop. That's
and
right.
She's like opening up the grandma's like stuff or storing it, and she's about to shut the light off, and she sees like kind of like an outline of grandma.
Yeah.
Of Ellen, I should say, and it's such like a striking image because I never really saw a ghost in a movie like that before too. It's such a weird looking thing where she's kind of smiling extremely still.
Yeah.
And then it does that lights out effect where it switches on and she's gone.
Oh yeah, dude. Lights Out's such a fucking cool short film. Any listeners or viewers who haven't seen the short film for Lights Out, I highly, highly recommend going and checking it out.
Because they probably heard or seen the movie.
Yeah, the feature-length movie is also... I enjoyed it,
But the short film is a very inspiring horror short because it can also teach you a lot about like, oh, if you're like a beginning filmmaker and you have a great visual idea, you can make a thing out of it that can like garner a lot of attention.
Yeah, you can get creative with it.
There's another wide to close-up shot that I wanted to talk about because I think this will be a great way in for us to discuss Toni Collette. Is the first like grief counseling group therapy sequence, because it's one wide and it moves slowly as she kind of reveals what's up with her fucking family.
and how you realize how much like baggage
trauma
she has.
they've gone through and
Exactly.
baggage they have. Exactly. Like I wrote it down here how she says mom had DID, dad died of starvation because he had psychotic depression and starved himself, and brother had schizophrenia and hanged himself because mom put people inside of him.
Yeah, because he was claiming mom was trying to put people inside of him.
When you watch this in a rewatch, you're like, oh, mom was corrupting every man in her family.
Well, and she was literally trying to put people inside. She was trying to put a demon inside of him.
Remember, she was just like, I didn't give Peter to him, but right when I gave Charlie to him, she put her claws on him.
Or on her, yeah.
On her, sorry. And it's a great way to be like, this is how you're going to learn about the family. It's going to be one wide to a close-up that becomes more unsettling. It gets closer to her as her story becomes more horrendous. Mm-hmm. I think we should start talking about how good Toni Collette is in this movie.
Yeah, she's pretty good.
All right, so next scene.
That's it. Yeah.
I think the narrative after this movie came out is like, how dare she not get nominated? And for someone like you, you'd probably heard that, right?
Yeah, every comment section, every Reddit thread because I go down little hereditary rabbit holes. Her Treddit holes.
Her Treddit holes is a very good one.
Thank you.
And no, of course you're welcome. Now, when you watch this movie for the first time and you heard all the like hullabaloo around Toni Collette's performance, did it live up to your expectations?
Oh, before I saw the movie, like the very first time I watched it, you're saying? Yeah. I mean, I always really liked Toni Collette, funny enough. I haven't seen, because she's in Little Miss Sunshine.
Yeah,
movies as well.
You know what's funny about Toni Collette? I didn't realize that I had seen her in many movies before until this movie.
Sure.
She'd always been like an actor for me. And then I was like, oh no, holy shit, she's been so much.
Have you seen, you have not seen About a Boy, right?
No, but you've told me about this movie.
Yeah, her role in that movie is completely different, but she's great in it too.
Yeah, Little Miss Sunshine, she's completely different. I remember after Hereditary, one of her next movies, like next big movie, was Knives Out.
Oh yeah.
And I remember she played this like social media influencer mom in that, and she was very like, bougie. And it was such a blast seeing her in that role because she was so funny.
She's probably one of my favorite actresses in general, but she's one of those actresses that just understands the assignment and
commits hard.
She gives what the movie needs.
Little Miss Sunshine, she plays a believable, like, a middle-aged, middle-class mom.
Yeah, who's stressed and exhausted by these quirky characters in her family.
Little Miss Sunshine and Hereditary could possibly be a really funny double feature.
They're both about life and death.
And the family and dealing with shit together.
And failing together.
Again, I'm telling you, if like the Alamo Drafthouse did like this really hilarious double feature, that would be amazing.
Would you rather start with Hereditary or end with Hereditary?
Oh, no. I would want to end with Hereditary.
Okay.
Because I feel like it would be extremely weird to like Hereditary, 5-minute break, and then go to Little Miss Sunshine, but your mind's still fucked from Hereditary.
Yeah, fair enough. It's gonna be distracting.
I feel like it's so much better to be like, life can be beautiful, and then be like fucked over by Hereditary.
But yeah, no, I think now though it's funny because everyone's take is, and they're not wrong, saying Toni Collette should have been nominated, if not won an Oscar, right? But I think it's a shame that this movie wasn't nominated for anything.
Oh yeah, it was completely snubbed. I mean, I think a lot of people were angry about the fact that like, oh, this is just another example that no matter what kind of movie it is, even if it's this prestige horror movie, Hollywood will never recognize horror movies.
Yeah.
And I think, Get Out winning screenplay was a huge deal for that reason. But it is one of those things where I'm like, Hereditary is like one of the best movies of that year, and one of the best movies of that decade. So it's a true shame. Either way, though, I think one thing that I'll say that I find fascinating about her performance, and I find what truly makes it great, is she can play everything so perfectly, where she can play horrified and petrified. She can play herself being scary. Like, even before she has that turn where she becomes possessed, like, she's still kind of terrifying.
Oh, yeah. I mean, particularly when you're talking about, like, when she's suspended in the air, sawing her own head off.
I'm talking about before that sequence, though.
Oh, okay.
She's still kind of unsettling to me. The faces she makes, like, the whole dinner scene where she's looking at Peter.
Yeah.
And there's that shot of her just being like... and you're just
seething at him.
And you're just like, oh, Mom.
Well, that's the thing. It feels like you're getting yelled at by your mom.
Yeah, exactly. And the paint thinner sequence and all that stuff, it's like, there's something about her face and the way she uses her face to her advantage that makes it unsettling. And also on top of that, she's fucking, like, she can deliver lines in a very funny way to me. Mm-hmm. Like, that face on your face is just a great, like, example of that.
Sure, yeah.
Where, like, that face on your face is a really funny line. Yeah. Like, I remember in theaters, people laughed. Like,
I know. Yeah, it's true. I think
it's a lot of range.
This role demands so much range, you know?
It's a really weird part, too.
Yeah.
Like, it's like someone, on one stage, it's like a drama where it's like, okay, I lost my mother, but I also hate my mother. Oh, but I might hate my son. Like,
exactly. And then, oh, I'm possessed. There's a lot of credit.
A credit? There's a lot of little credits given to everyone. Hi, I'm Ari Aster. This is my whole movie. I'm sorry, that was like a low-hanging fruit.
I just wanted to pause for a second. I was like, okay, I'll just process this one. I won't scramble to defend myself. Just accept it, swallow it.
This movie's scary.
Get it out of your system.
Is there anything else to add here with her, like with her performance specifically? I think it's just good, right? It's good. I like it.
I like it. Yeah, we can just say it's good. Yeah, no, she gives an incredible performance. I think I can't imagine anyone else playing that role.
But it's also like, okay, if you want to talk about her character for a second, like, imagine your mom did this.
Yeah.
Like, I when I watch this movie, I can't help but think, like, fuck, what would happen if my mom turned into this person? Mm-hmm. If I woke up and I had paint thinner, suddenly my mom was bringing me down to do a seance. Like, the way Peter cries during the seance scene where the mom's trying to summon Charlie again, and then suddenly the mom is speaking like Charlie, and Peter starts crying. That cry, again, is so like, oh, mommy, what happened to mommy? He feels like a little kid. Alex Wolff is so good in that because he does feel like a fucking tiny kid just being like, what happened to mom, dad? And he starts crying.
Yeah.
It's like, imagine if your mom did that.
Yeah, well,
like, it's crazy.
That's what I mean by, like, the horror in this movie, I've been saying it a million times, but is just in the family dynamic. And watching this, like you were citing Ari Aster, this nightmare that won't end.
Yes.
You know? I didn't know that that the actor who plays as Steve is the same guy that was in Usual Suspects.
Oh, yeah.
I forget what his character's name was.
Yeah, I remember when we reacted to Usual Suspects, after the reaction while I was editing it, I looked up the actor and I'm like, oh, fuck, that's the dad from Hereditary. I didn't even put two and two together, but he's really good in this. And he has such a funny role to me, where he's like the only like person that doesn't go fucking insane.
Yeah, I know, and
he's the straight man, right?
So. He is, yeah, arguably, to a fault, to where like he has no choice but to be the normal one in this family right now. You know what I mean? And that's kind of what's sad about it, is like he, in doing so, I think it kind of weirdly isolates, some of the way they react to things. Because I think the way, like, let's say, the mom is like yelling at Peter, right? Mm-hmm. The feeling I can imagine from her end of the dad only comforting the son through it, it's a very like, oh, you're making me feel like I'm going crazy when really I just lost my 13-year-old kid.
Well, it's the whole idea. Again, I mentioned the paint thinner story because it's so important. Again, it like unlocked the story, unlocks the movie for you a little bit, but she still feels as though the family's against her.
Yeah. And
when the dad does stuff like that, only comforts Peter, and also Peter just in the dinner scene just being like, this is good food, Dad. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
He's like, thanks, buddy.
She just scoffs at it because it's just like, you fuckers still don't trust me.
Yeah.
And I know you guys are against me.
Like I said, in doing so, though, him acting like he's the normal one, having to be the normal one, quote unquote, makes it comes across like it's easy for him, and making her look like she's just not processing it right.
Oh, well, okay. Great way to segue into the whole idea of her making miniatures.
Yeah. Super interesting. Also, this real quick to go off that. I don't want to cut you off.
No. Go ahead.
But it is interesting how she told Charlie early on when she was like comforting Charlie in the beginning of the movie after the funeral, how she was saying like, it's okay to cry if you want to.
You never cried when you were a baby.
You never cried when you were a baby. But she also clarified that she was a bit of a tomboy when she was young.
Oh, yeah.
And she said, I never liked dolls, but she makes miniatures for a living now. You know what I mean? There's something kind of interesting about that. And the idea of the movie being kind of in a dollhouse aesthetic.
Yeah, it's the way that's funny. I didn't process the fact that, like, I didn't put two and two together. I never played with dolls.
There might be no real connection, but it's just interesting.
No, but it seems too, like, pointed to be a coincidence, you know? But that's the great thing about this movie. You can watch it for a fourth time and still not know everything.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, speaking of, like we talked about this in Whiplash, our favorite movies, I mean, yours especially, where like, there's exploration involved, where you can watch it again and again and find something new. I mean, that's obvious. Everyone likes movies like that, but it's hard to pull off.
Well, and as time passes, too, I think what's cool is, like, movies can mean something different to you, or as you experience something. Like you said, this movie meant something different to you after going through a family tragedy yourself.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I looked at that, even though I've never had an experience that harsh in a dinner scene with my family, I looked at that dinner scene differently.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting to me. I looked at it, like, from a different perspective. But I will say about the whole, like, recreations, like, so Annie, I just noticed that this movie, like, all the women are artists, which I thought that was an interesting thing.
Wait, what was Joan?
Oh, no, sorry. All the women in this direct family are artists.
Got it, okay.
So Ellen, she makes the doormats for everyone. And I thought that was an interesting thing. It was like, my mom used to make doormats like that. And she, like, with their names and everything. But then Charlie and Annie, it always seemed like they were artists too. Like, Charlie, she draws, she sketches, right? Yeah. And she was even making those little Paimon statues with the carvings and everything. And what was super interesting to me on this rewatch that I felt smart about noticing, I was like, ooh, I can write this down, was Charlie and Annie use their art to process trauma, which is like a clear, like, Ari Aster put himself in that a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, when he was writing that, I don't doubt that he thought about that. I'm just like, that's how I process my feelings too, through art. Because Charlie, she, like, in the funeral scene, she's drawing her mom. Mm-hmm. Like, giving that speech about her mom. And Annie recreates horrible situations through her picture, and how she says, like, when she recreates a car accident and the dad's petrified of how, like you said, she's processing it.
Yeah.
He's like, what happens when Peter sees this? He's like, well, it's not about him. It's a neutral view of the accident.
Yeah, when it's so clearly there's more to it than that, you know?
And it's just an interesting thing that they process trauma through art, and that's kind of like, that's very Ari Aster to put that in.
You said thrama, by the way.
That's what I meant.
You're like, I'm sticking with that. But, yeah, no, I agree. And it is interesting flipping that around, too, that Peter and Steve kind of just blank out. They don't really process it. They bottle that shit up, you know? And obviously, we're not in the market of just, you know, whatever, gender stereotyping it, but it is an interesting observation of, like,
of how men deal with certain things and how women deal with certain
exactly,
things.
Yeah. And
and, you know, again, like you said, maybe gender stereotyping, especially for this movie, may not be the right thing, because if you want to go into that conversation, it's like, yeah, women are crazy, they can't deal with
that. We're not in the market of going that
they're gonna kill you. Like,
no,
but it is an interesting point of view that the dad and the son both go completely blank and distance themselves.
Yeah.
And even though the dad's helping, he's like, I'm just going to have a glass of whiskey, take the sleeping pill, and just like...
Yeah, they're just trying to get back to normal. You know, it's really what 100%. It is. And I think, you know...
I joked about that SAT prep thing, but that is what the dad's doing. Because it is, like, when I watched that again, it literally laughed so hard. Literally, Charlie died. He comes back from school, and the dad's like... Did you take care of that SAT prep course? And he's like, I will. He's like, well, you know, you gotta do that because it's coming up. And I'm like, in my mind,
that's remotely in his brain right now.
You think I'm concerned about an SAT prep class? Like,
yeah, but
it makes sense. The dad is being like, we gotta fucking move on.
Yeah, but, you know, Annie has also the right to be sad for a while.
And what I think is so brilliant is that when someone she actually cares about dies, because she didn't really know her mother. She makes that clear. Like, I didn't really know her at the end. When Charlie dies, she feels extreme agony. There's this anxiety you have as a person who doesn't feel that same agony, that, like, should I be sadder, right? And she sees Steve and Peter as those people. I was like, how the fuck are you guys not talking about this?
Exactly.
Are we just gonna have dinner as a family? Like, that's what that whole, like, screaming match is about.
Yeah.
I know I was very long-winded to get to that, but I was trying to find a way to say, like, that dinner scene is literally Annie being like, fucking let's discuss this.
Yeah.
The line that I think is so important is, like, And you don't own up to anything. And what a waste. Maybe we could have done something with this. I think that's such an important line of like, we went through something horrible. Maybe we could have solved something. Maybe we could have brought us together.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting as well is that the three-dimensional aspect is that Peter also has every right to not be able to process it. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, of course, she has the right to wish that he got to give her that closure and tell her I'm sorry and those things. But like, he's a fucking, how old is he? 16, 17?
Oh yeah, God.
How
the movie establishes him as like he's just a regular stoner teenager.
He's so obviously overwhelmed with guilt. You know what I mean? And he's so obviously remorseful. And he's obviously sorry too.
Yeah.
But the problem is though, you think of it this way, like, have you ever been guilty about something and you have trouble apologizing for it because you can't forgive yourself and you don't think you deserve to be forgiven by someone else?
I felt the feeling that, I mean, I haven't gone through this level of guilt.
Of course, yeah, just on a basic level.
But to be clear, on a basic level of guilt, I have felt the level of guilt where I don't even want to face the person. So that feeling that Peter has, to an extent, right, of him just like going to his room and the next morning hears mom cry and he's just standing outside and he doesn't even want to face her, or that feeling of just like him coming back from school in the night kind of like prepping himself to go inside. Remember that shot? I've had that feeling before.
That's the thing, is like apologizing can also be the first step to forgiving yourself. And Peter has not forgiven himself.
He can't.
Yeah.
You know what's interesting about this movie too is that realizing that all this was planned, the whole like insignia on the pole where the car gets hit, obviously there's something to do with the grandma like placing that deer, or the spirits placing that deer there.
Yeah.
So it caused him to crash. But even if Peter figured that out somehow, the thing that sucks about it is that maybe it could have still happened because he was high.
Yeah.
That's what's tragic about it. Is that, sure, there were other things at play, but Peter still fucked up.
Well, and yeah, exactly. And he wasn't watching her, and he didn't bring the EpiPen.
That's the important thing. He didn't bring the EpiPen. He lied about the party he was going to, and he told her just go eat that cake without considering there's nuts in it.
Yeah.
Like, as a person who's had friends with peanut allergies, like whenever there's cake or any sort of dessert, the first question they ask is if there's nuts in it.
Yeah. And to be fair, obviously, like, it's not 100% his responsibility to bring the EpiPen. Annie could have given it to him. Charlie could have remembered.
Like I said in my synopsis.
Yeah, he played a role, he played a role, but he wasn't entirely responsible. We're not just blaming Peter. But
there is a part that he played in it.
Yeah.
Which I think is bold for the movie to go into.
He was being an irresponsible older brother, but fairly normal irresponsible older brother. It happens, right? People bring their younger siblings to things that they shouldn't be at. Most younger siblings will say, like, I was at this fucking party that my older sibling took me to that I shouldn't have been there. I was the only kid there.
Yeah.
It happens. It's a fairly normal thing, but yeah. He fucked up. I
love that idea of just like the most vulnerable man.
Well, that's their whole plan too. They're trying to get him in his most vulnerable state. Because I remember I read on a Reddit thread saying, like, why didn't Paimon just take him over after Charlie died? Like immediately when he's in the car. But they're saying, no, they still had more work to do. They had to tear apart his family too.
Isn't that
so evil?
It's also such a brilliant idea for a horror movie.
Yeah.
We got to get our final guy, not a final girl, which is, I love it. He's the final guy.
Yeah, final boy.
The final boy. We got to get our final boy so vulnerable, and that's when we attack. Like, we got to tear his soul apart.
Yeah. Side note, doesn't Final Boy sound like a brand? Like, oh, where'd you get that Final Boy shirt?
Like an offshoot of H&M or something.
Yeah, exactly. It feels like, oh, yeah, let's go to Final Boy.
It's all like corduroy pants. I'm a Final Boy.
Yeah, little camera satchels.
Camera satchels. a little beanies with FB on it. Or they don't even have a logo because they're that like hip. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I can see the boy being spelled like BOI, Final Boy.
Their Instagram page is just a bunch of fancy coffees. Like, they're so cool. They don't even show the clothes.
Yeah. It's not. They don't need to. They just say, like, drop coming on the 29th, and they don't even show what it is.
It's available for 1 hour. There's a huge line on Melrose. Like, everyone's into it.
The guy who owns it's like 23.
Fucking Rice Gum is selling it to you on a stream. Oh my god, Final Boy. Buy it now. We should create merch that just says Final Boy on it. That'd be good merch.
Final Boy merch.
Something that we didn't mention with the whole like car sequence though is that the mom finds out Charlie's dead and she starts wailing, like crying really loudly. I've already mentioned a lot of her crying parts, right? But I do love how we thought we got a lot of the graphic stuff out of the way, and then in the middle of her cry, that's when we cut to the head.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of brilliant that you actually don't expect to see it. Like you think the movie's not going to show you that. You're like, oh, that's too much though. We're not going to see the head because they hide it from you. And like we're like, oh, Peter can't even look at it, so the movie's not going to show us. But then it cuts to her head with flies
or ants. Yeah,
ants.
It's covered in ants, like crawling on its eyeballs and all this stuff. We probably can't show this in the video version because it's pretty gross, you know.
Yeah, and every like YouTube thumbnail, they always has to have it blurred out or something like that. But
yeah, but with that being said, it's a really effective but very disturbing image. And
it's like kind of a jump scare when it shows up too.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I mean, but like I said earlier, it's very blunt at showing you like, no, this is what Peter did.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's telling you this is what happened.
You're going to see it.
Exactly. So you can feel that. It makes you empathize with Peter too, though. In a weird way. I mean, obviously it's his fuck up, but you also know it was an accident. And he would never in a million years would ever wish of doing something like that.
Yeah, and how she says, like, and I know you're in pain, and I know you feel guilty or whatever. I wish I could take that away from you.
Yeah. But she clearly blames him. That's a separate note. But she says, I wish I could shield you from the knowledge that you did what you did.
Yeah, but your sister is dead.
Yeah.
Also, that one line that I think is very important, when... I think this is where we can probably talk about Joan a little bit. Mm-hmm. Joan, this person that she runs into, and I'll get to the line that I'm talking about, but I want to set up Joan a little bit. Joan, this person that she runs into when she decides not to go to the second therapy session, kind of, and she's about to turn the car, and this like woman that's wearing this like silk outfit is just like
cardigan or something.
That has this like extreme like mom energy. Yeah. Hi, what happened? You know what I mean? She knows about like Toni Collette's like mom. She knows about Ellen's story because she was there for that. And you can even see it in that shot that she's there, but the camera doesn't call attention.
It doesn't draw attention to her at all, but she is there.
And Joan doesn't know about Charlie, and she says Charlie was killed.
Yeah. And she was killed.
Do you remember? But like the camera stays on her, and Toni Collette is like, was killed. Like, she's kind of surprised she said killed.
Yeah, you know.
The performance was like very clear that she was like, holy shit, I just said that.
Yeah, I took it when I saw that moment as like her saying out loud that Charlie's dead. You know what I mean?
I thought it was very pointed that she's saying didn't die, my son killed him.
That might be the case, yeah, because like I said, when I first saw it was more of like she kind of swallowed that real death and had to say it out loud.
When she's telling Joanne the story of the paint thinner, she says, Peter always held it against me, and I can't do anything about it because it happened while I was asleep. Like, she said the while I was asleep a little bit later. Like,
yeah, as like an afterthought. By the way, I wasn't conscious for that.
But she already told the story. Like, when she was telling the story, it's like, and when I woke up, I saw the match, and I unlit it immediately. Like, the way she's saying
it is like defensive nature to it.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how, like, she's being like, I mean, of course I didn't light them on fire.
Burn my children alive.
Like, I wouldn't do that. But it all is, like, you watch it, like, on this, like, second and third time, and you realize this movie's doing this, like, slow dial into craziness.
Oh, yeah, it's very much you're watching a descent into madness happening. And it's all because of things that are out of their control is what makes it so kind of sad to watch. Because every time I watch it, I always want things to play out differently. I'm always like, no, don't take her to the party. No, don't go with that girl. No,
the party scene is the one where I'm just like, dude, just don't, man.
Yeah.
Fucking don't. Just stay home. Again, it's like your worst nightmare. Like, your worst version of that is what this movie's showing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, your worst anxieties, your thoughts of what could happen. Like, Peter, like, now he's scared of his mom, and he's anxious about his mom and what his mom's doing. But he imagines his mom choking him out in bed. Remember that?
Yeah.
Like, the hands coming out.
He tried to pull my head off.
Okay, do not tell Dad. He can't know about this. It's just like, Mom, fucking what? I remember that shot when she wakes him up to, like, do the seance downstairs. He said, Peter. And then, like
right up in his face.
And he's like, what? And the camera kind of tilts with her.
Yeah.
It's, like, such a gnarly shot, too. It's so unsettling. But your worst anxiety is just coming alive is what this movie is.
Yeah, it's just mayhem by the end of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, should we now just go into these last 30 minutes, I think?
Sure, yeah. I think I'd like to start with that classroom scene.
Yeah. Holy shit, right? Like, doesn't that scene still hit?
It's gnarly.
I mean, that's probably... Okay, this is, I think, where we should just very quickly mention how good Alex Wolff is in this.
Yeah, Alex Wolff is fantastic.
One thing, because I have to say, the moments that you and I are citing, this classroom scene and the car scene, that are the most terrifying moments in the movie, I think, Alex Wolff is leading that shit.
Yeah. I first saw Alex Wolff in the Naked Brothers
Yes,
band.
of course. You and I are in the same generation.
Was he the drummer or the singer of Naked Brothers
singer,
band?
I think. Let me see.
Because every time I Google imaged it, it'd be pictures of the whole band, and I can never tell which one's Alex and which one's Nate.
It's hard to distinguish them, especially in the beginning.
Because Nat's the one that was in Fault in Our Stars.
Oh, he was.
He was the one that went blind.
He was the blind, blind one.
Okay, it looks like Nat's the singer.
Okay.
I'm guessing he's,
And
anyway.
you can tell when you watch this movie.
Yeah, you can tell Alex reeks of drummer energy.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the reason I'm bringing it up, I'm like, he's leading these scenes that we think are the most terrifying. I mean, like, he's selling the shit out of it, man. When that classroom scene happens and he lifts his arm and it bends,
yeah.
My third watch, this is a scene in a sick way, I have looked up on YouTube and watched.
Oh, me too, yeah.
I'm fascinated by it, but horrified. But when his arm reaches upwards, cracks, and he's just like, Peter?
Yeah.
I'm still, like, my heart is about to jump out.
Yeah, it's so uncomfortable. And also, like, it's amplified by the fact that his friends and his love interest are right there for it, too. Like, one of the top comments when I went up to watch it again on YouTube was saying that the humiliation aspect weirdly amplifies the horror.
Oh, the fact that you're in, like, with your classmates.
It's the middle of the day in front of your whole class. Like, how fucking embarrassing would that be?
That's
if you
true.
Fucking break your nose right in front of them for no reason.
When it, like... obviously he slams twice, but then when he wakes up from it, how he's like, ah, and then stays on a wide of all his classmates and his teacher looking at him.
And they all just probably assume he's having a mental breakdown or
because of the family stuff.
Or it was a seizure or something, right? They all,
Yeah, and that is true. The embarrassment of it adds to it.
Yeah.
I never thought about that. I think it's also the way it feels like gravity is pulling his face another direction. Like, when it cuts to that close-up of his face, he's like...
Oh, yeah, his eyes are bugging out. His face is just contorted.
It's like he's being pulled out or something like that.
Yeah, it almost feels like someone tied a string around his face and just pulled back.
A little bit. And, and Joanne just yelling at him right before, be free!
Yeah, and she's also... I'm pretty sure... I read about this, that the words she was chanting are the words that were written down throughout the house.
Oh, like on the walls?
Yeah, those are like the summoning of Paimon words.
Interesting, yeah. I didn't process that.
I think that's the case. Like, I haven't verified it.
I mean, how do you feel when you watch that scene?
Oh, I mean, disgusted, horrified, all the good stuff,
Yeah.
And also, I think it's like, it's just so memorable. You know what I mean? That's one of the few scenes that really stuck with me too. Like, as soon as he slams his face down, how he's released and then he like flies back screaming.
What about it do you think is different from other getting possessed scenes?
It's like weird. It's weird.
That's a good way to put it.
It's not like obvious, when you think of like, his eyes turn black and he says in a distorted voice, "You're all gonna die."
He doesn't do a Reagan thing.
Yeah, or Evil Dead or something like that, right? They could easily do something like that.
Yeah.
But the fact that he makes such a weird pose and face, it feels otherworldly. You know what I mean?
You can't place it.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like something a human made up.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to put it. I think I mentioned earlier in the podcast how, like, Ari Aster is good at creating an image that is so unsettling, something you haven't seen before in a very Kubrick way. And this is just a prime example of that.
And it also amplifies how much Paimon really wants him too. Like, at this point, shit's getting real. And it feels like Paimon for a moment's like, "Give me your body." Like, he's like hurting him.
Maybe if I break your nose.
Yeah, if I really fuck with your head. It's funny. This is slightly random, but every time my girlfriend just casually to herself just makes that noise.
Oh.
But this is before I showed her Hereditary. But I was like, "Oh, you're gonna not do that anymore when you watch Hereditary."
Oh, so this was before she knew.
Yeah, she just,
asked me to do that casually. Well, that was also a great tool we didn't mention. Throughout this movie, they just have that put in.
Yeah, have you heard the theory that because a lot of imagery of Paimon in like satanic folklore, whatever you want to call it, is him on a camel. And there are people that say that noise is like kind of like what people make. It's a noise that people make to like make a camel move.
That's insane.
I don't know if it's true or not. But
here's the thing about Ari Aster, though. Like, if you look at the research for this movie and Midsummer, this is a guy that does his homework. Like, he goes deep into researching history. Like, I remember in Midsummer, he talked about how he learned the entire rune alphabet. Like, he's obsessed with, like, anthropological stuff. And I wouldn't doubt, because even if you go on the Hereditary Wikipedia, which I can't access right now, it's a good source to start, like, kind of learning about all his reference points. And he mentions there's so much, like, ancient history shit that he's mentioning, or just mythology. And it's just, that's what kind of sets us apart. There's so much lore put into this movie. Mm-hmm. And at a certain point, you're like, okay, this is probably based on real stuff, but then there's also made up stuff. There's a good, healthy mix of it. Yeah,
and he does it in such an accessible way without feeling like he's just giving you a college lecture on that. You know what I mean?
You know what I love about this movie, amongst other things, is when Toni Collette learns about Paimon. You know how we learn about him as an audience? We get a quick close-up of something highlighted.
In a book. Yeah, and it's not like a full-on, it's not like this Google Bing scene.
And that's what I'm getting to, though. Because, like, if you took a pee break, or maybe you, like, zoned out for a split second, you might have missed it. But what's so awesome about it is that there's not that scene where they're on Bing looking it up, or there's not that scene where, like, the husband comes home, and she's like, okay, so Paimon was this guy, you don't understand, and she has, like, PowerPoint up. Yeah. You know what I mean? There's not, like, her doing a lot of research in a library, and through that research, we see more images. It's one close-up of a book.
Yeah, and a couple pictures while she flips through.
But, like, the fact that that's it?
Yeah.
Like, the first time I watched this movie, I was like, what the fuck is Paimon? Like, I didn't even process it. I, like, had to watch it a second time to actually... Like, it was when I watched it with you that I fully understood the lore. I just think that's awesome that the movie is so brave and doesn't have to show its cards.
Yeah, well...
It trusts the audience.
It trusts the audience, and you took the words out of my mouth. It enhances it really well. I think. I just love how we say Bing. By the way, I just want to highlight that because, like,
they couldn't get Google. Yeah.
Don't you love those sequences though when like the character starts researching? Like, remember when Twilight did that?
Oh yeah, was it Bing? Or no, that was Google.
That was Google in that one. They got. Oh,
yeah. Twilight she learns about vampires, and the audience learns about vampire lores through Google searches.
Even though the vampires have the most basic vampire rules, that they're like all pale and they're all clearly old. Like, but she has to Google what vampires are and look into the deep history.
I know. God damn. Remember that era when we just watched all Twilight movies for the channel?
Yes, I do remember that. I cherish it.
That was like quite a journey. I feel like that was like along with some other videos, that series was kind of a turning point. I feel like, oddly enough, I mean, you and I referenced The Thing as a big turning point for us when we reacted to that video, or Spaceballs. But that Twilight series, I feel like we got some, like, loyal fans after that.
We did, yeah. That was when people were actually following our videos and, like, after watching previous ones and wanted to wait for the next one. That was the first time we really had that kind of serialized feeling of making videos.
100%. For new listeners and viewers, we're talking about a reaction channel, by the way.
Yeah.
So we talked about the classroom scene, gets carried home. Now, full on, Annie's, like, learned about Paimon, and she's worried about the son.
Yeah.
And we as an audience know is like, okay, yeah, the son's the most vulnerable one.
Yeah, and she tries to explain the lore to Steve in a very haphazard, frantic way.
But I love the idea is like, go up there's a body.
There's a corpse in there.
And what does every horror movie do?
They get rid of the thing that the characters find.
I love the idea that he goes up there and he's like, holy shit!
It reminds me of like The Hangover when he looks to see the tiger in the bathroom.
Dude, yes! Because it's fun. When you watch it a second time, it's just funny. Yeah. He's like, oh!
He's like, oh my god.
That was your mother up there.
Yeah, I know. And then he's like, you did this. You dug her up.
Because they planned it early on that he was getting calls about like the burial site being dug up. And
he didn't want desecrated. What does that mean?
He didn't want to tell Annie about that because she's already worried about so much.
Yeah.
And she wasn't telling him about the grief counseling sessions. So now he thinks she was lying and dug up the body herself, which, from his perspective, kind of tracks with how crazy his wife became.
Yeah.
She tries to get him to throw the sketchbook, into the fireplace.
Because that was like the link to Charlie, right? That was the whole thing?
Yes, she's trying to convince him, and it's all played in this oneer. It's like, I don't think we should be doing this, and she's like, oh, for fuck's sake, and she like takes it, throws it, he lights on fire.
Yeah.
Which is now like the shot. It's like,
yeah, I remember.
It's a big gift.
Yeah, I remember before I even saw Hereditary, someone had a T-shirt for it, and it was an image of just that.
Well, A24 sold that shirt.
Okay, yeah, okay, that's exactly the shirt that I'm talking about. I knew someone who had that shirt and brought it to work with them.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty iconic shot.
It's amazing though. It's really freaky. It's disturbing how jarring that is.
And then you get one of my favorite like horror movie shots. I mean, you could say that about this entire movie, but of just like Toni Collette looking like,
yeah.
And then it cuts to a wide, like I said, like a light switch, match cuts to night.
Yeah.
Now, when I was this time around, when I was watching these last 20 minutes, 30 minutes don't really scare me. Funny enough, this is the whole like popcorn horror movie where I'm like, oh hell yeah.
It delivers and becomes like a proper Conjuring type movie. Yeah.
Yes, and I was like, now we're getting our Conjuring type movie. This is the shit I'm here for. And then I mean, come on, Annie in the corner.
Oh yeah. Him just barely waking up, completely missed the whole shit show that happened downstairs.
Oh, which I loved about it.
Slept right through it after breaking his
nose. I was like, oh god, Mom.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, fucking hell, man, the shot of her just on the corner. Yeah. I've mentioned it already a lot of times, but it still works.
Oh yeah, it's so creepy, and.
Again, that was another joy of like not only being in the theaters for it, because for obvious reasons, I won't repeat that again, but just watching it sitting next to you. I remember, and again, you're not, I gotta be clear, when we're watching movies off camera, you're kind of like more I'm sucked in, I'm not gonna talk over this.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny actually. Like but in Hereditary, when that shot showed up, I remember you being like, oh
yeah. It's so jarring because you don't see it for a second, but then when you fucking see it, it's like it completely throws you off.
I got a question for you. Something we didn't mention is you showed your girlfriend this movie.
Yes.
Who hadn't seen it. What did she think of that shot? Did she have like a reactive moment, or was she totally sucked in?
No, she did. She did have a reactive. So, it was like it took a while for her to see it, and I was worried she was gonna miss it.
I know. I would feel. So I was worried about the same thing when I was showing it to you.
Yeah, it sucks. I kind of wish I didn't, but also at the same time, I don't think she would have noticed if I didn't say anything. So I was like, "Do you see that up there?" I decided that's all I said, and she went, "Oh my god!"
Oh, okay, cool. So she still was scared.
Oh, yeah.
I think like I remember watching this movie with you, and I'm like, okay. No. I can't point it out to him because it's going to be so much better if he notices himself. Yeah. But I was like biting my tongue. I was like, I hope he catches this.
Yeah, this is one thing. It's like, yes, outside of camera, I am more mellow when I watch movies, obviously, just because we're YouTubers and we just, we heighten it, right? And
also, it would be insane if you were by yourself and being like, yo, this is crazy.
Yeah, look at that shot. You know what I mean? Like I don't vocalize myself the same way if I vocalize myself for an audience, right?
I think people understand.
Yeah, that. Exactly. Yeah.
But you're not faking anything. Yeah.
Exactly. To clarify, though, the thing that is, I think, true to life, though, is I want my reaction off camera to be as pure as possible. So I can't stand when people be like, oh, this next part's awesome. Oh, wait till you see that. Oh,
I was like that, to be honest, until I met you.
I snapped you out of it quickly.
A little bit, which I appreciate because I learned that people don't like that.
Yeah, well, and so like for me, it's like I want the thing to surprise me the same way it surprised you.
100%.
It takes it away when I feel like someone's like watching me watch it. You know what I'm saying?
Oh no,
and it's very weird because people watch us watch things for a living.
No, but like also like if in the reaction you had seen the movie and I hadn't, and you were like, dude, this next part's about to be funny, it would be annoying for those people watching us too. Just be like, hey, let him experience it.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think people get that. Hey, remember when she like swims away?
The weirdest shit I've ever seen. Yeah, but it's so scary, isn't it?
It's scary
because it's so quiet. That's what it is.
Yeah, it's also hilarious. Like again, that's what I'm saying. It's like this weird sense of humor that he has. But yeah, the first time you watch it, it's terrifying.
Yeah, and if you laugh and are afraid at the same time, it makes sense. 'Cause you know what I mean?
I think Jordan Peele said something like horror and comedy are like are like sisters, because they both deliver something very similar to an audience, where it's like a instant gut reaction, where drama doesn't have that, suspense doesn't really have that, but horror and comedy have like very vocal reactions from an audience. So that's why a lot of horror filmmakers like have a sense of humor about it too. When you're watching a horror movie, you're also laughing a lot. Like if you're with a big audience, you are laughing.
Yeah, there's like, I do that all the time too, and I'm sure people who watch our reaction channels know. If we see something scary or disturbing, sometimes we're like, like I'll kind of laugh at the same time.
Yeah, sometimes you process a shocking thing by laughing.
Yeah,
That's exactly a human reaction, and I think the best filmmakers know that.
Yeah, because it feels like, the movie is getting you. It almost feels like someone's playing a prank on you or something like that.
But okay, yeah. So we gotta talk about this final sequence. Poor Peter walks downstairs. Mommy,
yeah, he sees his father's
burnt
charred
to a
corpse.
crisp.
Yeah,
and then once again, Annie's in the corner.
Yeah, Annie's in the corner.
Which I forgot it happened twice. I forget she shows up in the corner again.
Yeah. There's two different background Annie in the corner scenes. But
and rack focuses this time too.
It draws attention to it more the second go around. But yeah, as he's looking at it, shaking with fear, he turns over and then just sees a fucking naked dude standing in the hallway grinning at him.
I know. It's both like
nightmare fuel.
I was gonna say both like Robert Eggers and Ari Aster have this like obsession with naked people.
Well, because it's like Hollywood doesn't show naked dudes a lot,
and it's because it's an easy, like in my opinion, it's a very easy, shocking thing to do. A naked man, especially. Like if you show it's between a naked man and an old woman. A naked old woman and a naked man are two things that Hollywood doesn't show.
Yeah, well, and I also think like in the context of this movie, like nudity or being naked is kind of like supposed to be in art your purest form, right? Your most
you're giving yourself over completely.
Yeah, it's like your most primal way of of being.
You're right? Letting go of like the material world, your human self.
And so seeing a bunch of naked people that are worshiping Paimon together, it feels like we're no longer part of the modern world. We're now part of this otherworldly thing where arguably, I guess, everyone in that world's naked because clothes are kind of a materialistic thing.
100%. And I recognize this time around that the naked man that he sees grinning is the same man that Charlie saw at the funeral. It's like the
same smile too. If you watch it again, you're like, oh, fuck that guy.
Great casting too. This blonde-haired dude just like smiling awkwardly. Like what? Like Ari Aster probably just casted him off his face. You know? What I mean?
Well, I heard a lot of the cults also in the grief counseling group outside of Joan too.
I need to look into that.
Like I heard like they pop up also like when Peter's walking down the hallway and you see like the Paimon light glowing through the hallway.
Yeah.
You can see the teacher in the background. Or no, not in background, maybe ahead while he's looking, like, doing, like, a
through the window.
Motion.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, there's a lot of, like, cult members that are kind of just sprinkled through the movie.
The Paimon light is also such an interesting tool this movie uses.
Yeah.
That blue, like, it feels sort of like techno-thriller style light.
Yeah.
I've never seen ghostly presence portrayed like that in a movie.
Yeah, and it was very simple. It didn't dwell on, like, let's... make him invisible, and he picks up this little thing. And
yeah. Even the seance that she has with Joan, like Annie's character. Remember when like she senses the sun for the first time? She's like, "Oh shit!" Like you don't see anything move except the glass. But before the glass, you don't see anything move. But like you just feel it and you sense it.
It's Toni Collette's performance too that sells it. Where it feels like a real human being experiencing the supernatural and is unable to process it.
And so he sees the naked man. He turns around. And now Toni Collette's not in the corner, but she's in another corner.
And jumps out at him.
Possibly the only conventional jump scare in the movie.
Yeah.
Where she just jumps out and runs after him.
Which my girlfriend screamed and that happened.
Hell yeah.
Out loud, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's like a... Yeah. That everyone did.
Yeah, we all did.
Like that, again, like that's a very conventional scream. And like the fact that the movie doesn't let go of that feeling, because he starts running and... Like she starts running after him so quickly. He's climbing up the stairs, and your like anxiety is fucking going up because you're like, okay, fucking climb up, go. And he shuts the door, and you hear the mother knocking like repeatedly, and he says "mommy"
a couple times. Yeah,
I like it specific that he says "mommy."
Yeah, he's so frightened. He's so terrified that he's just reverted back to a child, which is like a common thing that I hear happens. Like people who are about to die historically have like called for their moms.
Yeah, it's a thing that moms love to share.
Oh, Jesus, I
know. No, but it's like moms love that kind of stuff. They love sharing that, like, at the end of the day, you're gonna miss your mom.
You're all mama's boys, I know, right?
As a mama's boy myself, but she's knocking. He's like, "Mommy, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry."
Yeah.
And she's not knocking. She's banging her fucking head.
Such a disturbing image.
Because it's so rapid. It's like da 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 da.
Yeah.
Like the movie doesn't let go of you.
And you still can't see her face throughout that too.
I know. It's just the only time you see her face is when she's sawing her head off.
Yeah.
Does she have a wire?
Yeah. She gets a piano wire. You can remember how the piano's like knocked over and it's like wide open?
Oh,
it's piano wire.
I remember looking closely and I couldn't even see it, and I was playing it on TV. I'm like, oh, is that supposed to be like something invisible? Like
Yeah, no. You can hear it actually when Peter's first waking up and creeping through the halls or whatever. You can hear like some thudding noise, and you can hear like a ding, ding, like kind of noise.
Whoa!
Like you can hear her pulling it off. Yeah.
Oh my god.
And so she wrapped piano wire around her neck and has used it to cut her head off.
She's sawing the head, and
this is a pleasant conversation, by the way.
Yeah, he's frozen, right? He's like, oh, that's my mom, and she's cutting her head off.
Yeah, it's so disturbing. Again, it's weird. It's just weird. Her
yeah.
going so fast, going.
Where you're like, what am I looking at? Which
Yeah.
is you're feeling what Peter's feeling, which he's frozen in place,
Yeah.
and he's like, what the hell am I looking at?
And Peter's been out of the loop on most of this, by
Which
the
is
way.
another hilarious part of it. He's like, what the hell did I walk into?
Yeah, exactly.
But
like he slept for just a couple hours, then just hell breaks
imagine
loose.
waking up and your mom's attacking you.
Yeah.
Again, it's one of those things where like, imagine if your mom was like that.
Yeah.
And I remember the comment section in this scene on YouTube, if you look it up, someone was saying how hilarious it is that like him seeing his mom doesn't make him jump out the window. It's when he sees like the naked people smiling at him. He's like, ah!
Yeah, not his mom cutting her own head off right in front of him, looking right at him.
The way I always read it is that once he saw the other naked people at the attic along with his mom, that's kind of what broke him. And he's like, oh, fuck this.
Yeah. Well, even right before, too, he walks over and sees that the body's gone, Or no, he see the body?
No, he sees the body's gone.
Oh, that's right.
He sees the outline, but there's like flies and everything.
Yeah. And then he sees a picture of his school portrait or whatever, his school picture with the eyes cut out.
Yeah.
Which, this is, okay, another Ryan Hollinger reference, too. Ryan Hollinger referenced Oedipus. And you know the story of Oedipus, I'm assuming?
Yeah, it's a pleasant story.
It's a very pleasant story. But he made the comparison because the similar concept of people trying to avoid their fates and walking right into it in doing so. And at the end of Oedipus gouges his own eyes out after finding out that he,
yeah.
Spoiler alert for Oedipus, but Oedipus sleeps with his mom accidentally. And when he finds out about it, he cuts his own eyes out.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if there's a bit of an Oedipus pull, because I do subtly mention Oedipus in the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
So.
It is always funny, like, talking about Oedipus, where I'm just like, oh, that's like the most messed up story ever.
It's a very, very disturbing story.
Yeah, so he jumps out.
Yeah.
And fucking, like you see the shadow of a floating body above him.
Yeah, presumably Peter's, soul.
And the light comes into him and he wakes up. And is that when the music starts, or does the music start when he gets into the treehouse?
No, the music starts when he's like walking up to it,
and he sees like a headless corpse float into the treehouse.
Yeah, it's Annie's. Well, you can hear Annie finalizing the decapitation during that
the thud.
Yeah, because when I first heard it, I thought that was like a sprinkler when I first heard it.
Interesting.
And then I processed, oh wait, no, she's still cutting the head off.
That would be funny if he landed a split second and then the sprinkler turns on.
Yeah, exactly. But
that'd be like a comedy cut. Like,
but yeah, then you can hear, exactly. Like you can hear the head rolling off. Ari Aster has this kind of fascination with decapitations. Fascination with Decapitation, by the way. That's my band name.
Yeah, and I will never listen to it. No, it's just because it's not my type of music.
There is a band called Cattle Decapitation, so
for sure. And listen, respect to the band. Like, I don't listen to that music, I don't know. I listen to the Back to the Future soundtrack.
I'll listen to John Williams' best of.
Imagine how insufferable I mean if that's the only music I listen to. Anyways, I remember, like, okay, just very quick side tangent.
Yeah.
Yesterday I came up to it and I'm like, dude, I'm finally listening to Rolling Stones. Pretty good band.
Her Beastie Boys too.
Yeah, I didn't grow up with a lot of American music. Funny enough, I did grow up with a lot of Indian music, So
funny enough.
I know. I don't know why I said that. So there is now I'm catching up with a lot of music in a weird way. And so I am experiencing these things where I'm like, Bruce Springsteen, man, fucking hell, you know? Like,
That's awesome.
where was I?
Oh, but we're talking about the decapitation scene.
Decapitations. Okay, so yeah, by the time it gets to like Beau is Afraid, it becomes kind of self-aware and comedic the way he uses decapitations. But you're right. Throughout his filmography, he like is obsessed with that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I remember Ari Aster talked about like how it's such like your head is such a big part of your identity, and I think the concept of like I think the implication is the only way to release the possession or whatever is through decapitation, you know.
Interesting. Because
the mom gets possessed, you know, and moves and gets into the pose and is also decapitated. And then same with Annie. And then obviously Charlie, too.
Yeah.
So it is interesting. But yeah,
he does it in all his movies.
Yeah. Yeah, they all have heads being smashed.
Like, again, by the time it got to Beau is Afraid, I was just laughing because I'm like, fucking Ari, doing it again.
Yeah, it's like how Tarantino has a fascination with people getting shot in the nards.
And feet.
Yeah, he has a fascination with feet, yeah. It's just his little quirk.
It's super fascinating. We get to the treehouse, and the music is at like a crescendo at this point.
Yeah, yeah, it's like, the music is so good because it's like victorious. You know, it sounds like something to be proud of, like you're experiencing something really beautiful,
profound, like
yeah,
we've arrived, we've done it.
Yeah, we've ascended in a way,
yeah.
And it's through something that's there's such a sinister undertone to it.
Why is it in a treehouse? Do you know? I never got that part.
I don't know. I think it just gives it this kind of outsidery feel. You know, the fact that it was like Charlie's place of comfort too.
Yeah, okay, so maybe it's because of Charlie, but I find it fascinating that it opens with the treehouse, like everything just happens in the treehouse.
Yeah, yeah. I think it gives it like a temple shrine kind of feeling.
Totally. That's kind of how you can, I mean, especially the last shot, you can look at it that way too.
Yeah.
He sees the carved out statue of Paimon and everything.
Well, it's a mannequin with Charlie's severed head on it that's still rotting.
Oh yeah, Jesus.
It's so gross.
I forgot. Like, I don't know how I forgot about that.
Like, how many movies can you cite that have children's heads?
So something about that sequence, I always found the way like you hear the dialogue was so off-putting. Not just because of what she's saying, but I was like, what is it with the sound design here? And I realized that in a lot of movies, even when they're indoors, they always add ambient noise, whether it's just like natural sound or anything that could be going on, because nothing's truly ever very quiet.
Yeah, yeah.
Like there's no real quiet, right? That's why in Quiet Place, when the deaf character turns off her hearing aid, you actually hear it quiet for the first time.
Real silence, yeah.
And something this movie does is that it cuts out all ambient noise when she talks.
Yeah, that's true.
Hey. So that's why it feels like, oh, they're in another planet.
And the music just fades very quickly, too.
And even if they cut the music, you could still feel like you're part of this world. But the fact that they cut out all natural sound, now you only hear her, it's so unsettling.
Yeah, well, and the fact of how kind of comforting Joan's voice is, because I think what's creepy about this cult, I mean, besides several things, but none of them seem to be sinister. Like, none of them are unhappy people. They all seem very excited. It's almost like
they're bowing down to one of the kings of hell.
Exactly, and they're decapitating people and planning this horrible thing. But they all feel like, almost like, you know, door-to-door religious people. You know, they're just super pleasant.
Well, I think both with this and Midsommar, the things that they're doing are horrendous. Like, the cultish thing that they're doing is horrendous.
Yeah.
But they obviously don't come from that perspective.
No, they think they're just committed to their deity.
Which is what cults are like.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great point, though. They're doing something that they think is angelic and spiritual. And the way she delivers a line, you are now Paimon, one of the kings of hell, or one of the 7 rulers of hell, or whatever.
Yeah.
Hail!
Yeah, hail Paimon!
And then it cuts to that fucking wide shot of black void, treehouse, open facing, dollhouse-like.
And then just cuts to black.
I love the small touch of, like, the letters in red passing down to the next credit.
Oh, yeah.
Or, like, each letter passes down to the next name, which I'm just thinking as an editor, figuring out, okay, his name works with this name. Like,
yeah. That's true. Both
but sticking on theme, yeah.
Yeah, they both have that kind of like.
Midsommar has the flowers. It turns into small letters turn into flowers.
Yeah, exactly.
But I love the fact that even that tiny detail, like Beau is Afraid, I won't spoil it, but the credit sequence for that Beau is Afraid is pretty like.
Yeah, that's true. Ari Aster goes hard in his credits.
It's underrated, but I feel like that's just as important, you know?
Totally.
He's like not letting you go until the movie ends, kind of that thing.
I know, dude.
Which is what I love about it. I'm so thrilled that we finally got to do this.
Yeah, me too.
So join us now on our after show if you're a part of our Patreon. We would appreciate all our patrons who support this channel and our movie reaction channel. It's an honor to make stuff for you guys. We have a lot of fun hanging out.
We also have new spooky merch only available for the month of October, so check out nicedudemovienight.com to pick some up.
Thank you so much for watching, and stay spooky, dudes!
Woo!